Petrie racing team that did both Plymouth and Dodges. So they had to do it all from coast to coast. And Dan, can you come up and start talking about them a little bit?
That'll be an hour.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob. Good evening, everybody. Back in 1969, when John Petrie had the opportunity of getting the Supercar Clinic in Canada, it was a real honor for us. We're a small team, consisted back in the day of mainly 4 crew members, John, his wife Grace, and generally 2 mechanics with John or assistants on the road. So back in the beginning, in 1968, I believe, Herb, was that the first year that the U.S. clinic started? 67. So in Canada, of course, because we're in the Great White North, we're like, a couple of years behind. So it takes a little bit of time for us to catch up. So we were fortunate enough that Chrysler Canada, through their wisdom, and actually they were forced by the U.S. to say, you better get a clinic in Canada. We want to sell some cars. So we were fortunate enough that the powers to be in Chrysler Canada made the effort, and John had submitted back in 1965, after he attended a clinic at a dealership called Argyll Chrysler Dodge in Cooksville, Ontario. It was a performance Dodge Chrysler dealership at the time. Well, John was driving what was known as the Canadian Highlander for Argyll back in those days, and John attended this clinic in the summer. Well, Dick Maxwell happened to come up and conduct this clinic. And John, all of a sudden the light bulb went on, and John said, you know what, I'm going to send a letter to Chrysler Corporate and see if I can get a program in Canada like they have in the States. This was the beginning of John's career with Chrysler Canada. Now, unfortunately, John didn't hear back from Chrysler until the fall of '68. Well, that's a lot of years later. So at that time, he did get the offer, and in '69, we were fortunate enough to have the clinic program with the Dodge Plymouth products in Canada, coast to coast, under the Supercar Clinic badge, as well as the Chrysler John Petrie Supercar Clinic. See, in the States, they didn't run it as a Chrysler, they ran it as Plymouth or Dodge. So we were fortunate enough to represent not just 2, but actually 3 brands of the Chrysler Corporation name. So once we got into our Great White North, Tim, is this a picture you put up here for me? That's the picture you put there? Well, actually, those steins look kind of neat. Are those pints? Well, Bob and Doug McKenzie, thank you very much. There's our picture, which we travel from coast to coast in the Great White North. There we are, up there. I'll get you later, Tim. So this was a clinic that we did in 1970 in a city called Peterborough, Ontario. The attendance was 1,140 people at this clinic. And it turned out to be one of the largest Hemi-concentrated areas in Ontario, and still is today. So it's pretty impressive that the clinics generated this type of interest for the general public, all from coming out and talking to these people, also racing, and racing every local track across Canada, along with the clinics. Even in Quebec, we'd go into a small little dealership in Quebec, and we would actually race down the main street. They would actually close the main street in some of these little towns and these little villages where the dealerships were, and we could actually run down the street. A great time. It was a lot of fun. A shot of John here. John, you would have been 20, what do you think? 26, probably 26. Meanwhile, the rest of us, we're teenagers. We're just along for the ride. Mr. Petrie's teaching us everything and telling us what to do, so we're doing it. So we had a great time with the clinics. They were a lot of fun. Here's a picture of John with a 71 CUDA just inside the dealership, showing a couple of folks some of the different components on the race car at the time. So what I'd like to do is just to give you an idea on the clinics. I'm just going to reminisce for a moment. I'm going to go back in John's career to 1961 when John's career started. John started in 1961 driving a D-stock automatic 59 Sport Fury. After that, John drove a 63 Savoy, Plymouth Savoy that had a 426 stage 3 engine in it. In 1965, John drove the Canadian Highlander for Argyle Chrysler Dodge. In 1966, John purchased the car and created it as a wheel stander in an AFX experimental car. What that led to is John getting married in 1966 to Grace, and led to the first team member to join the team. So at this time, what I'd like to do, Tim, if you wouldn't mind, if we could just roll it. Tim's just getting back at me for what I said to him. No? No. It won't play? Okay, then ladies and gentlemen, the first crew member for John and Grace Petrie back in the day, I'd like to welcome, 46 years later, Mr. Paul Patterson, known as Mr. P. Mr. Paul Patterson. Come on up here, Paul. Come on, buddy. Oh, look what we have. Do we have another mic to give him? Thanks, sir. Hello, testing. Hello. Hey, Paul.
Hello, buddy. How you doing?
46 years later, and we finally get a chance to see this man again. Now, how many times in the crowd that we have here today in drag racing has that happened? It happens a lot. But this is a reunion time, and thanks to the efforts of the Hall of Fame here, and to Rob and everybody else, it's put us all back together again one more time. So, what do you have to say, Paul? What would you like to say to the crowd?
Well, of course, I'd like to thank the Mopar Hall of Fame who put all this together. The shows we're at today is just fantastic. And I was sitting there thinking about the first time I met John Petrie. I didn't know anything about racing, really. I had bought an old drag car. I was going to become a dragster. I took the engine apart, didn't know what to do with it. And I heard he had a speed shop up the road. And I tugged it over there, and he says, "Who's this dope on a rope?" And I heard him talking to a guy in the shop. He was saying, "She's bored and stroked." I thought he was talking about his girlfriend.
Okay.
I didn't know anything about racing. And then him and I went on a bit of a 5-year road trip. And at the end of it, he taught me everything he knew, or he taught me everything I know. But he still hasn't taught me everything he knows. And I love the man.
Thanks, Paul. I just want to show you this one picture. This is John and Paul actually racing out in Penfield, out in the East Coast in Canada. John's in the Dodge, Paul's in the Plymouth, and you took the business seriously. Every time you could beat him, you would try to beat him. Every time, right? Behind the wheel.
The boss is right over there.
Oh, I'm sorry, the boss is over there, okay. Well, ladies and gentlemen, our first team member, Mr. Paul Patterson. Thanks, Paul. Paul is the one with the white t-shirt on there beside John. The next team member. The next team member is a good friend of mine. I've known him for quite a few years. Happens to be my younger brother. But he also happens to be the first and the youngest team member back in the day who we nicknamed the Curbsider. So I'd like to introduce my brother, younger brother, Gary McLennan, who introduced me to John after the fact. Come on up, brother. That's the boy. Hello. Hey, brother.
How are you tonight?
Good.
How's
How you
everyone
doing?
tonight?
Look at that look on your face there. That was a serious look.
I was in deep concentration that
Were we
day.
in trouble there? What was happening?
I think we were running good that day.
Were we running Ronnie?
If that was the semifinals at San Air, I believe we were.
Oh my God, that's why you had that serious look on your face when you're standing there and in the engine. So we got John. What were we doing there?
To tell you the truth, my memory's not that good.
Looks like we were setting the rockers,
Could be.
right, in that picture. That was good.
I'll go with that.
That was a good picture. So back when Gary met John at first, Gary's going to tell you a little story on how this all happened and how we got the nickname the Curbsider. Go ahead, brother.
I'm sure you all remember back when the only drag racing you could watch was Wide World of Sports 2 times a year. Half of it was drag racing, half of it was chess. So I knew what race cars were, I knew what they looked like, and I saw John's great big truck driving through our neighborhood. So the Saturday morning, I got up at 6 o'clock, went and sat on the curb in front of John's house for 6 hours, till they finally came outside to unload the cars. And he looked at me and he said, "If you're going to sit there, you might as well help." That was 50 years ago. And that's where that story came from.
Fantastic. There's a story for you. Brother, that was great.
That's great. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
I'm done.
Hey, take care. Thank you. My brother, Gary McLennan. The next one I'd like to introduce on the team is a member that we also haven't seen since, I'd say, 1971, 45 years. Mr. Steve Penn. Steve, come on down. There he is. Wow. Steve, you and I go back a long way because we traveled together on the road. Oh, we were nasty.
A lot of time.
Yeah.
Of course, there was only half of me then.
Now, Steve. Now, there's Steve there in front of the 70 Challenger. Where were you, Steve? Where was that track?
Oh,
Do you remember?
heavens, I have no idea. We were
No.
in so many places, so many times.
Yeah, we traveled all over the place, all over to North America and Canada, everywhere, right? Coast to coast?
We did.
Yeah,
We've been to-
you?
Left Pomona the day before the 71 earthquake. We've been down there testing for 2 months.
Yeah.
Left the night before the earthquake happened, so we watched this trail of destruction as we left the town.
No kidding.
It was
Wow.
interesting.
That sure was. That's the 1970 Duster. You're there. You're pushing the car with John.
I seem to be pushing the car a lot. You know.
Oh, you were the guy that pushed the car all the time. Okay. Yeah, that was what was happening out there with it. But it was funny because back in those days, I mean, it was basically you, John, and Grace.
It was.
We were home in the shop. We worked, because Gary and I, we were still in high school, so we were still going through the whole thing of having exams. And Grace would say, if you didn't have good marks, you weren't racing, you weren't going out there. So we made sure that Gary and I tried to get the best marks we possibly could to continue our education in drag racing. Now-
As part of that education, I got to celebrate my 21st birthday on the road.
See? All right,
And,
congrats.
If everyone knows 21 is very significant
That's
because
right.
of drinking ages.
Yeah. Now, did you really party that night?
I did.
Oh, you did? All right. Now, there's a thrashing night. Look at that one. Where were you?
Englishtown, I think.
No, you're in
No?
California.
Is that Cal? Oh, that was
That's
it?
a parking lot. There he is. Mr. Petrie just got it. Okay, so we're taking a clutch flight out of the CUDA and putting in a 4-speed. Oh, you wanted to beat the Motown Missile. Oh, okay, all right. Ted, did you hear that? Yeah, so that, okay, I hear that. That was good, John. I like that. Yeah. Yeah.
That was our lives, and a very enjoyable time.
You did, and there's a picture of you, Steve, with John on the road, the car clinics, of course. In Canada, the clinic program was a little bit different because one day we would be Dodge, the next day we were Plymouth. and we would go maybe from a group together, it might be 250 people. We could have gone to 400, 600 people, depending where we were, but it was always a lot of fun. It was always a hoot.
Never, never a dull moment.
Never that stuff at all. A couple of words you'd like to say, Steve?
To obviously thank the Hall of Fame for this wonderful opportunity, to you,
Yeah.
Gary, for putting it all together,
Yeah.
and to everyone here for building the cars and building the concepts and giving us that opportunity to go out on the road and play and just have a great old time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. That's great. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thanks, Steve. Steve lives in Texas, so he was nice enough to come up with his pretty wife, Susan, who's out here in there. Hi, Susan. Who's next here? Pat Brown. Wow. Have we got a story to tell you? He's actually our very youngest member and a very good friend of Gary's. They went to school together, and they both were in public school in the chess club together. Chess club, okay. And in high school, when they went to Dunbarton High School, which is in Pickering, Ontario, out in Bay Ridge is where we're from, Pat was having lunch one day in the cafeteria, and Gary walked by, and Pat was reading a National Dragster. So Gary snapped it out of his hands, and he said, okay, how fast did Garlits go? Which Nationals was it, brother? It was at Indy, the Indy Nationals. So Pat had said, he went a 623, right? And you said, there's no way. You said he went a 621. Pat said, no way. You opened the book, it was a 621. So between Pat and Gary, these two boys are quite the historians going way back, because they grew up on this stuff. So there was a lot of fun for them. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce our actual youngest team member who is still racing in the NHRA for Steve Harker out of Atlanta, Georgia, Mr. Patrick Brown. Come on up, Pat. There you go, Patty. Thank you. Wow, look at that shot of you. My God, you're all done up.
All serious.
Yeah. Where were you?
That was at Indy,
Was it?
working for the SK team at the time.
Yeah?
And we're just about to make it past there, or we just made it past.
Yeah. How was the car running?
It ran very well.
Did it?
Yeah. It was
Well, let's talk about 2014. How well did you boys do in 2014 in the NHRA?
we won the World Championship.
Look at that.
We won the division.
Look at that. World Championship.
Northeast Division.
All right.
And we had 5 national event wins in a row. So it was
Fantastic.
quite a season.
Good for you, no, and that's
Yeah.
great to hear.
Yeah.
So you got a few words for the crowd?
I just want to say thank you to everybody here for presenting all this for us, and it's been a great journey. Thank you to John for getting me started in all
All right,
this.
there we go. Thanks,
If it
John.
wasn't for John, I was 15 years old when he took me under his wing and taught me the ropes to start with, and I ended up
But
where
he
I
did
am
it
now.
for all of us, though.
Yes, he
right?
did.
He
He
did
did
it
it
for
for
all of
everyone
us.
that he
You know,
looked
he
after.
took us under his wing and
Yep.
said, do it this way. This is the way I want it done. We did it, and it worked out great. So we thank you, Mr. Petrie.
Yes, thank you, John, and thank you, everyone.
Hey, thanks very much, Pat. Thanks a lot. That's great. So who's next? Danny McLennan. Oh, shit, excuse me, that's me. I'd like to have a gentleman come up on stage here for one, if you would, because I don't like talking about myself. Bill Richards. Bill, come on up. Bill is the announcer at Toronto Motorsport Park, which a lot of folks would remember as Cayuga. Raceway Park.
Thank you, Danny.
You're welcome, Bill.
It's not easy to give yourself a pat on the back, and I think Danny needs, he's a very humble guy, and he's done a lot of work for the Petrie team and bringing everybody together. It's an incredible amount of work. He's gotten everybody together, and some cars being built, and Mark's brought the original Challenger that you see in the screen there. That's in the hallway there. That's the real car. The Demon is also in Carlisle. That's the real one as well, from 1971, 70 Challenger as well. So I think Danny, well, he's been on the road when they do the Canadian tours. It's a lot of miles, a lot of back and forth. Anyways, there he is, looking as dapper as ever. And
Boy, the pants were dirty.
yeah, I don't know how that happened, but anyways, he needs a lot of credit. I know the Petrie team, and there's a big crowd of supporters. Up in Canada, we have a lot of historians, and I guess because we're snowed under 6 months of the year, we got a lot of time to talk about it. And so he's done a lot of work to bring everybody together. We've got a big support team. He works tirelessly on the phone trying to drum up sponsorship and put packages together so that everybody could come even to Carlisle here. And he's really the backbone of the modern day John Petrie team and all the people that love this sport of drag racing and follow Canadian history. And Danny's the guy that's put it all together. And with all the miles on the road and the stories that he could tell, I think the most important thing that Danny's done is what he's doing right now, and that's bringing it so that everybody knows all about the John Petrie racing team. And congratulations, Danny.
Thank you, Bill.
You did a really
Appreciate
good
it.
job.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Bill. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
Thanks for taking the time. Also, just to let you know, our photo gal, Stacy, who's here with us tonight, Bill and Stacy were married a little less than a year ago, right, Bill? Stacy, stand up. Let's see you, dear. Where are you? There she is. She's right front and center. That's Bill's wife, Stacy. Thank you, dear. You've done a great job. We really appreciate all your efforts. Now, Grace, unfortunately, couldn't be with us tonight. Grace, about a week and a half ago, broke her collarbone, so she unfortunately wasn't able to make the trip. She wanted to. She just wanted to say to everybody that she really wanted to be here, and it would be a great opportunity for her to thank everybody in the drag racing industry for the career that she's had. So what I've done is put together a few pictures of Grace with John back in the day when in 1969 they were on the East Coast. I believe it's Halifax, if I'm not mistaken. I think Gary, that's Halifax? Okay. I have to ask my brother because he's the historian. He knows all this stuff. So that's John and Grace there with, is that the track manager, John? It is? Yeah. So that's Halifax. And here's Grace helping John in the 1970 Pro Stock Duster, which was the first year of Pro Stock on an HRA, pack the chute so that John gets down the track safely. This is a shot last year at Mopar Fest 2015 in Canada in Kitchener, Ontario, where Grace was gracious enough to join us for the clinic that we had done back in August last year. That was also the time when Rob took the time to come up and see us in Canada for the 3 days, and Herb was there. Herb joined us for 2 days to help us on the Plymouth side. We did Dodge and Plymouth. Well, Herb was a real gentleman to come up for the 2 days to help us in the clinic, and Rob came up and he said to me, he said, you know what? He said, I'd really like to get John Petrie inducted into the hall, but he said, I'd like to do one thing more. I think I'd like to create a team. Get the team inducted, not just John. And Rob, we thank you for that. That was a great idea. And also to the Motown Missile folks here, the Missile Group, to you gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen also, it's a great thing. It's really great to see that happening. Paul Iman. Now, Paul Iman worked with Grace very closely. Grace was in charge of all the administration, everything to do with travel, everything to do with the meets. There was 1 year, I think it was 1971, Grace had booked us into Florida for the Gator Nationals, I believe it was, and I think Grace made a mistake because we arrived in Florida a week late. Yeah, a week late. We pulled into a gas station and the kid said, wow, he said, you should have been here last weekend. Wow, there was a big race down here last weekend. So, oh, it was. I'm sorry. Then John will correct me on it. Okay. But Grace and Paul Iman worked very closely together. In the clinic program, Paul was our liaison up front, so he was out a week ahead. Now, when I talked to Steve, what Paul did a week ahead wasn't just work. He's a party animal. So when he was younger, he partied pretty hardy, right, Steve? See? That's right. So Paul did all of the photography. He was the media and public relations guy, coordinated all the clinics with the dealers as far as how the clinics were put together, attendance, the cars that we needed there when we brought the race cars in. Now, Paul unfortunately couldn't make it because he had surgery on the 14th. They wouldn't let him come down here, so I said I'd say a few words about Paul. Great guy. He's been with us for an awful lot of years. We miss him, but we'll get a chance to see him when we get back home. And maybe if we get an opportunity some other time to get together, you get a chance to meet the gentleman. So that's Paul Iman. In 1970, Jim Gree, this is a gentleman who was a drag racing fella and a mechanic. Unfortunately, we didn't have any pictures of Jim, but he's in this picture with John, Dennis Warner. The third gentleman is Jim Gree and Grace. Jim was with us for about a year. Unfortunately, Jim passed away the late 90s, but we had lost touch with him. But we've spoke to his family since then, and we just wanted to say a few words about him. He's a real gentleman. He was a great mechanic, good car driver, drag racing driver. So we do miss Jim. Dennis Warner. Anyone in the crowd here remember Dennis Warner or heard of the name? Anyone here? Okay, from the Canadian side, yes. Well, Dennis Warner actually did an awful lot of work in the States. He had a shop in Long Branch in Toronto called the Dennis Warner Performance Center. Now, Steve, you actually worked for Dennis, I believe, in '69, correct? And then you joined us in '70. Dennis Warner was a real innovator. This gentleman did an awful lot of unique head design work, alterations for degree angles, for valving. Dennis lost his life, unfortunately, last year due to some lung complications. And when he finished his career, he was actually working for Sonny Leonard in Virginia, and he was a specialist for all the head work that was done. And in those days, last year when I spoke with them, they were doing all the head work for Hendrix at the time. So Dennis was a pretty sharp boy. So we miss him sadly. A great gentleman, really nice fella. He drove the 1970 CUDA for us. We had 3 cars in the 1970 program, a 1970 Duster Pro Stock, a 1970 Challenger Super Stock D-Automatic, and a C-altered B-Gas CUDA, which Dennis ran in Ontario and Quebec. Dennis, we miss you, buddy. This is a shot at Windsor, back in the day when we would go down to Chrysler Corporate in Canada, in Windsor. All of the engineers, all of the design people would come out for the day to see the new cars that were actually being built for racing that year. Ah. Your turn. It's coming up here. Tim's just making some adjustments here, I can tell. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to my boss and a very good personal friend of mine, Mr. John Petrie. Come on up, JP.
You know, my mic, where's my mic?
Try it.
You got it on now? No. You know what? It's getting past my bedtime, you know. Geez, this is great.
Never too old. Hello.
Are you going to use that? I can use this one.
Never too old.
You know, thank you, United States of America, you know, for having us Canadians down here, eh? Yeah, this is just great. What am I supposed? Are you doing all the talking?
Well, no, you can talk.
Okay,
I want to hear
you know
from you, not from me. I do enough talking.
You
I
know,
have a big mouth.
Danny's up here, and you think he's just a talker, but you know, Danny was actually my crew chief. As soon as he got to his schooling and everything on the road, it didn't take me long to realize that he was everybody in charge on the road, in charge of everything on the road. But then, you know, we didn't have much of a crew anyway, so Like,
we
you
were
know,
a small
you had to
team.
do a little bit of everything, right?
Yeah, we were a small team, you know. It's really 3 or 4 of us any one given time, and that was it. That was pretty well the maximum size.
Yeah, you should maybe tell them a little about what our schedule was. I don't know what the clinic schedules were
Yeah.
like, Herb. I don't know what your clinic schedules were like, but we were doing, was it 3-4 clinics a week,
Yeah.
running 2 cars,
That's right.
racing on the weekend, and then trying to wrench them in between.
That's right, plus driving, you know, from province to province.
Oh, I know.
Right?
Three-
And
it's
racing in the
3,000 it
state.
was 3,000 miles from our shop to LA. Not
Yeah.
3,007, like
That's right.
3,000 dead
That's
on,
right.
right?
Yeah, we were
And
doing
we
it.
had 3 days to get there.
That's right, you know, so we were motoring the whole
Yeah.
time.
So we slept on the truck and
Just kept going.
kept going.
Well, John, I just want to say it's been such a pleasure for myself and for all the other team members to have been able to work with you over all those years. We've had a real hoot. It's been a great time, and we really appreciate everything.
Yeah, thank you, Danny, and you know, thank you so much for inviting this Canadian race team down here in Mopar Hall of Fame. It's just a fantastic honor for us. Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
John.
everybody.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Well, we're not going to take any more time. I just want to say a couple of things, if I could, please, just before closing here. I'd like to have, John, if you could come back up on stage here for a minute, and Mr. Patterson, sorry, John, Paul Patterson, if you wouldn't mind coming up here, please. Back in 1967 and 68, John did switch from the mighty Mopar to a 4-letter word for 2 years, which was 67 and 68. Well, back in those days, John had the opportunity of racing against a very aggressive but very intelligent woman racer in the funny car division. And this young lady is up on stage with us. John and Della competed against each other in 67 and 68 on many occasions. So what we'd like to do, Della, is we'd like to present you with a little something while we're here. A kiss? A kiss, definitely. That should be John giving Della the kiss, Paul, but that's okay. But what we've brought is we actually have a picture of John and Della at Napierville racing each other. And this is for her. John's going to sign it tonight after. And this is for her. So Della, thank you very much, dear, for all the memories. You're great. And Paul was with John in 67 and 68 when this was going on, and that's for you, dear. I'll tell you, that's for you. Thanks. Thank you, Della. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to thank Rob Wolf and the Mopar Collectors Guide Hall of Fame people, and that's Lisa also, and Rob and your staff. Ed B., where are you, buddy? Where's my buddy Ed B.? Ed? Wow. Your team and your support for us, thank you very much for everything. You've treated us like gold, and we really appreciate it. And very last, I'd like to thank each and every one of you here tonight, and thank you for being here with us for us to enjoy this great occasion. Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming up, guys.